3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Gamer Buzz podcast.
Welcome.
It's been a little while. I'm your host, Seth. This is my co-host, Brett. And today we're going to be playing a little bit of video game, well, I don't want to say gaming historian. That's a bit of of a taken name. But we're going to play history professors a little bit. So we're going to be rewinding the clock to 1983, and we're going to look at the year that spelled game over for the video game industry. When it really crashed. A lot of things that went into that, but at the time, arcades were booming.
Oh yeah.
There were tons of home consoles. There were, there was a lot going on, and it was very, very promising, but a lot of things led to the crash of an entire industry until it finally came back, really ushered in by Nintendo, and a lot of other things that went into that, but we'll get more into that. Yeah, you excited for this episode?
Oh, very excited, yeah. The video game crash in 1983 is a big topic in video games, so I think we both have experience with it, but we've also done a little bit of research on the side, just kind of learn a few more things about it, a little bit more nuanced than just kind of... There's a lot of big stories in this kind of story, right? And some of them are apocryphal, and some of them are a little bit overblown, but still a very interesting kind of story to explore, so...
Yeah, and kind of see what perspectives went into that. Kind of what things like you were saying were separating fact from fiction.
Yeah, because I think there are certain things that get more blame than they actually deserve.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that.
Yep. So I think we're going to start by setting the scene a little bit. I've got a little bit of a guessing game for you. And then we will get into the details of the crash. But first, let's talk about what things looked like end of 1982, beginning of 1983. All right, so to get things started, we're going to set up the scene a little bit, kind of what things looked like in that late 82, early 83, just before the crash. So there were really three prongs to the game industry at the time. There was the console industry, the consoles people had at home. There was the arcade industry, your arcade, kind of your specialty, where people would come in and we'll let you talk about that a little bit here. And there was the very young, very burgeoning PC game industry.
Yeah, the home PC market.
So to get things kind of started, I'm going to have you do a little guessing game.
All right.
Can you guess 5 games that were on the list of 10 best-selling games according to Amusement Press Inc., Japanese publication? So 5 of the 10 best-selling games of 1982.
1982. So is this console games specifically, or is there arcade games?
This is console games specifically. They probably had arcade counterparts, but this is a list of...
So you said 1982, right?
Yep.
I believe, isn't that right around when Pac-Man for 2600 would have been maybe around then?
Okay.
That's kind of... The crash is talked about. They talk about the Pac-Man conversion for Atari 2600.
Yep.
Let's see. I don't know if Pitfall 2 would have been that era. Pitfall 2, I think, is a good example of a game that was a good game of that era.
Yep.
That might be a little later. I'm not sure on that, but that's kind of like a precursor to Mario. I'm trying to think of other stuff. Would there have been of like a Star Wars, maybe... Let's say Star Wars. Is there an Empire Strikes Back 2600 game?
Was there that or TIE Fighter?
For a console game?
Oh, no, I guess they didn't do
Yeah,
something. Okay, we'll
no.
say, Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll say Empire Strikes Back. I'm trying to think of even that era. To be clear, that we're kind of talking about the first major era of video gaming.
Yes.
And the video game crash really separates, that and the current era of gaming.
Kind of your BC and AD of the video game world
very
is
much
really
so.
what it
yeah.
is.
And unfortunately, I'm not as much an expert on stuff pre-video game crash because it just doesn't appeal to me as much. But what am I at? 3 here?
Yep, need 2 more.
Okay,
You've
2
got Pac-Man,
more.
Pitfall 2, Star Wars Empire Strikes Back.
Okay. maybe Space Invaders. Space Invaders would have been earlier than 82, but maybe it would have still been selling
Still
well.
selling well, sure.
Really racking my brain here for Atari 2600 games.
And keep in mind, it's just console games.
Yeah, but I know that like
but
there was other stuff. Yeah. Gosh. Donkey Kong for ColecoVision. I don't know.
Donkey Kong. All right. So let's go through these. Pac-Man, number 1.
For Atari 2600?
VCS, Coleco, and Nelsonic.
Okay. I think the VCS was what they called the 20 what they called the 2600 originally. So
yep,
that makes sense. All right, cool.
Pitfall 2, not on there, but Pitfall was number 9.
Okay, Pitfall 2 is probably after this.
So I'll give that one to you.
Okay, well.
Star Wars Empire Strikes Back. Not on there.
Okay, I can't remember. I think there was a Star Wars Atari game, but I can't remember what it was.
Space Invaders, number 7.
Nice.
And Donkey Kong, number 2.
Oh, wow.
You pretty much nailed it with everything but Star Wars. So just to bring some closure, number 1 was Pac-Man. Number 2, and all of these are for Atari VCS, Atari 2600, and some other consoles.
And Coleco and stuff, yeah.
Primarily Atari. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong. Number 3 was Frogger.
Frogger. How can I forget Frogger?
Number 4 was Defender.
Defender, okay.
Number 5, E.T., the extraterrestrial.
Oh.
Which we will get to that game and its importance, but just keep in mind it's very interesting that was a top seller.
I don't know why I didn't think of that, but okay.
Number 6, Berserk.
Yeah.
Number 7, Space Invaders.
Space Invaders, yeah.
8, Asteroids. 9, Pitfall. And number 10, Night Driver. Night Driver is the only one on there I'm not familiar with.
I've played the arcade game version of it. I think I actually talked about it in a previous episode. I think if it's the game I'm thinking of, it's an old driving game where the only thing on the screen is like a black screen with points of light that make the road up. Like if you're thinking like reflectors at night on a road. So I can only imagine what the Atari 2600 version is like, because that was like the arcade version, like the big arcade version.
Yeah, maybe I'll throw up some gameplay on the screen here.
I've never seen the 2600 version. I'm surprised that's a very early driving game though, so maybe.
Yeah. So I think one of the points that I want to make is, we're talking about the console market. There were great games.
Yeah.
There were great games prior and during the crash. Mm-hmm. A lot of people try to talk about the crash like it was just all shovelware all the time. It was just all bad games. But, I mean, most of these games that we said on this list are household names in 2025 today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So keep that in mind as we kind of talk about the crash. The next prong of the video game industry is really the arcade industry, and I was going to let you kind of make some points on that.
Yeah, so if we're thinking like 82, 81, 82.
Oh, and before I do that, I did want to put, just as far as values, in 1982, console sales were $997 million in 1982. So give you an idea of how big the video game industry was, just short of $1 billion.
$1 billion, the B.
In 80s times money.
Yeah. So it's like, what, quadrillion?
Much bigger numbers now, for sure. And then the arcade industry was worth over $4 billion in 1982. So big money when we're talking about console and video games. I'll let you kind of take it away with arcades.
Well, so, at the very earliest with PC gaming, which, early PC gaming is where console games kind of come from, right? Yep. So that was like terminal PCs and stuff that would have been at a university where people are sharing this big, computer room type thing. Yeah. So arcade games were kind of like the big popular thing with just regular people, I think, right? So at that time period, you had, Space Invaders was crazy. I think that was late 70s. Yep. So 81, 82... I think I either looked it up as 81, 82 or 82, 83 was like Pac-Man, Mrs. Pac-Man, which is one of the biggest arcade games of all time. Yep. So arcade games were doing great back then. I think, arcade games are a little bit different, whereas you put a lot of money into those between the hardware, all of the commercial part of it. It's a lot different than the console side of it, where you can't just dump trash.
Right.
As much, obviously there's bad arcade games, but it's
Right.
like they kind of live or die by how good they are.
Yep.
You know? So
it's like, to compare it to a console game, like if you go to a store and you buy a console game, they have your money. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have a lot of internet and things like that to warn people about bad games. So, but with arcade games, like, you're talking about quarters at a time.
Yeah.
You have to be good. You don't just get that money in a big box transaction.
Yeah, and arcade operators, they know what's popular because they're taking the quarters out of those machines every day or every week or whatever. So, you know, they know how well these games are doing, right?
Yep.
So it's like you can't put out horrible games in an arcade, basically. So arcade, it sounded like maybe there was a dip in the arcade market here, but arcade, that was like the golden era of arcade games right there. I mean, Mrs. Pac-Man, that is like, you know, in video game history, that is a monolith.
Yes.
You know, Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man.
Yep.
So arcade industry was doing great, you know. That was the start of it. Something like, you know, late 70s, you're talking about kind of black and white arcade games. Something like even like Asteroids is black and white. What am I thinking? Space Invaders, it was originally black and white and it had like a color overlay on it. But early 80s games, you're getting really colorful, good looking games like Miss Pac-Man, which is like bright and colorful. I think that's kind of the area of like Donkey Kong. Because remember, Donkey Kong came out before the Nintendo did, right? So originally Donkey Kong, what was it? Was Donkey Kong on that
2600.
List? It was 2600. So the Nintendo was publishing games on like earlier consoles before they even had their own console.
That's an important thing to note. Yeah, Nintendo didn't start as a hardware developer. They did have hardware.
So Nintendo actually had a long history of doing arcade stuff, but it wasn't a lot of it wasn't video game, or it wasn't video arcade stuff. It was more mechanical coin-op type stuff.
Yes.
But I guess the point I'm making is like arcade games were in a very good spot. They were starting to look really good. And, you know, thinking of things like Berserk and stuff, it's like very colorful arcade games and stuff. Where when you came home and played those on a console, we're still in the era of the arcade game is like the big money, good graphics. You know, it's the experience.
It was worth 4 times as much as the console industry from what we're reading here, according to the Vending Times is where I was getting those numbers from.
Yeah, it's like arcades were like serious business, and the home console thing I think was more viewed as a toy kind of especially back then.
And so the PC industry it's the third prong we referenced. It was really young at the time, so there really isn't a ton of data, but it's important to note that this is really when that leg of the industry started to kind of grow up, kind of mature. When PCs were starting to come into the home, people started having access in their home to those games.
The very first PCs that people had in their homes, a lot of it was like hobbyist type stuff. But by the early 80s, I was just kind of looking up the article of popular 80s home PCs, and it's really important stuff. Like Commodore 64 was in that era. The TI-99A was in that era. The Apple IIe. It's like with Apple, Apple gaming, you don't think of those things together, but back then. The Apple Macintosh was the Apple PC rather, was a huge gaming kind of machine. But so you had, even in Japan, you had the PC-90 or the PC-88 and the PC-98, which, if you know anything about Japanese computers, those are like the Japanese computers, like 81, 82. So this was really when the PC home computer. Speaking of PCs, I guess I forgot to mention the IBM PC was like 1981.
The PC,
Yeah, this is like when all these really popular computers, like this is the birth of home PCs, I think, home computers. So they were doing great.
So that's where they were at this time in the industry. There isn't a lot of information, but there was promising things on the horizon.
Yeah.
All right, so we've kind of talked about what the industry looked like, really a great era for gaming, but obviously that didn't last, or we wouldn't have this podcast, or this episode at least.
Well,
so let's get started and really talk about what led up to the crash. And I want to be clear, it wasn't any one singular thing. Product saturation was at an all-time high. Consumer confidence was at an all-time low, and it really was a quick turnaround. Just to kind of give you an idea, when you think of industries going down, you think of like tens of years. In just 2 years, according to historyhit.com, in just 2 years, the industry dropped 97%. It went from almost almost $1 billion industry in 82 to by 85, it's worth less than $20 million.
It's a lot of money if you didn't catch that.
Yeah. So walk me through your take first, as far as like what are some things that when we were researching this that stood out to you?
Yeah. So I mean, kind of what I said at the beginning about like certain things getting scapegoated and there being kind of apocryphal information here is people always want to blame E.T. for the Atari 2600 as the cause of the crash.
But Brett, we just saw that was in the top 10 games of 1982.
It was. So
are you saying there's nuance to this?
There is. So if you think about it, E.T. was a huge movie. Steven Spielberg, excuse me, and made probably tons of money, beloved movie. So when the E.T. game comes out, I think people were really expecting something special. But as we were talking here before, E.T., I mean, there's not really any Atari 2600 game that I love or think is great. I understand it's important, but like E.T., I feel like gets unfairly maligned for being bad.
Yeah.
It's just an average 2600 game, right? But I think Atari was really banking on that being huge for that Christmas season.
Yep.
And this may even be apocryphal, I don't know, but I thought that the story is that they produced more ET cartridges than there were 2600s out in consumer hands.
No,
because it was either that or Pac-Man. It was either that the notoriously bad Pac-Man, because they thought that kids would want their own cartridge and they wouldn't want to share them with their siblings.
Yep.
Which is like
silly.
It's like oh no, I need my own copy of Monopoly. Like,
at a time when save files weren't even really a
thing. No,
points.
There's nothing even resembling save files on any of these Atari games, as far as I know. So they didn't know what they were doing, basically.
So to kind of paint a picture, it wasn't the quality of the game; it was the destruction of consumer confidence. So people, like we said, it was in that top 10 list. People had their wallets out. People loved E.T. It sold well because the brand E.T. was going to sell. But then when consumers got it in their laps and put it in their console and booted it on their TV, they did not get the game that was promised to them. And that E.T. isn't the only one that did that. They weren't the only. I mean, that was industry-wide. This was happening all across. And another thing to note here as far as E.T., a lot of people don't know that game was made by one person. So this comes from BBC.com. One man was given 5 weeks to make that game. Just to give you an idea, a pretty typical development time for that period was 6 to 8 months.
Yeah.
And he was like, hey, you need to get this out for the holiday. And I would say for 5 weeks, a bit of a Pac-Man clone was about the best you were going to get.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it kind of boils down, tale as old as time, corporate greed. So another big one, I think E.T. came afterwards, but the Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man. So we just talked about Pac-Man, the biggest arcade game of all time at that point, maybe. Maybe Space Invaders. But so just like this highly beloved game in the arcades, and people said, oh, I want to bring this home. And the story that we saw kind of in the articles that Seth referenced here is that the guy who programmed the Pac-Man game for 2600 turned in a demo or a prototype and said, hey, this is
this is a benchmark.
This is an idea of what we could do. And Atari said, okay, and they just published it.
They shipped the demo, essentially. They shipped the proof of concept.
And to be honest, when I'm looking at footage of this Pac-Man game on 2600, and it's like, okay, that looks like Pac-Man on a 2600. I don't understand why people thought it was so horrible. Yeah. It's like, at that point, you're not even going to get even close to arcade-level games at home. You're just not.
Yep. But the problem is that's what developers were promising. They were telling consumers that that's what you were getting. And so, I mean, just to bring it back, I mean, it's just that faith was shaken in the industry at the time.
And as I was kind of going through these articles that you had me review here, it's just that's the two words I think you could sum up this entire crash is consumer confidence.
Yep.
It's just like, basically, to describe kind of like the situation is back then, Atari had no sort of like licensing or anything for their system where you had to pay them a certain amount of money to even release your game on their console. It was just whoever wanted to make games could.
Anyone with a coding set up in their basement could make it and put it on store shelves. Yep. And there was, quality control. Zero of it.
That's part of the reason that Atari collecting is so ridiculous, is you had people making like garage games out of their house. Yep. And this game sold 10 copies or whatever. Yep. It's technically an Atari 2600
an official
game.
Atari game.
Well, they're all kind of official. But
right. Well, that's the problem. There was really no concept of official. There were no guidelines or structure to official.
And that is really what drove them into the ground, because you had everybody and their brother making Atari games, and this was before a big, video game review industry kind of infrastructure was set up. Maybe you had hobbyist magazines and stuff, but you didn't have, websites. You didn't have any of that stuff back then to help consumers know what was good and what was bad. And a lot of this is like parents buying it for their kids. So they see a bunch of these cheap games, buying for their kids. And I was thinking about this last night. And Seth, you're going to be able to answer this like this. What's better? $5 games that all suck, or one $50 game that is amazing?
Give me that one $50 game. Yeah. Anytime. I'm going to get so much more, dollar for value. Or value for dollar.
So I think the first blow was, Pac-Man, because everybody probably wanted Pac-Man. They got it. They saw that it wasn't a very good conversion. It wasn't that fun. And then the same thing happens with E.T. It was a big holiday game that everybody's wanting and looking forward to, and it sucks. Yep. And the consumer confidence in home video games plummeted.
Yep. And that's why, and this is, for a long time, this was an urban myth. And it only recently was proven to be true. They found the landfill where they took all of the surplus cartridges. This is true. They did make more cartridges than the consoles.
Was that E.T. or Pac-Man?
It might have been both, but according here to American History Museum, in the landfill Smithsonian collections in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. Literally, there was a landfill they buried in the desert. They took all of these surplus copies of E.T. and buried them in the desert. They're like, get them out of here. We don't want these. Any memory of this.
They must have wrote them off or something as a loss or something. But for a long time, that was an urban legend.
That was an urban legend. And
people
I'm
didn't know
trying
for
to
sure.
find what year it was. It was very recent here. Like,
it was.
Like the 2010s.
Partially, I don't know if James Rolfe helped with that.
Yep.
The Angry Video Game Nerd. So, yeah, he had done a famous E.T. review on his channel, and his movie was partially about E.T. So, was it 2014?
Yeah, according to Henry Ford, April 26, 2014.
The Henry Ford?
The man himself.
The ghost, the shambling corpse of Henry Ford.
Sorry. The Henry Ford Museum website.
Okay.
Was, just to kind of cite my source there, April 26, 2014, they found the burial site.
Yeah.
Now, while it might not be fair to just point fingers at just E.T. for the game crash, it is probably pretty fair to point a big fat finger at Atari.
Yeah.
They were, not really protecting their customers from terrible video games.
Yeah.
Speaking of not protecting your customers from the video games, imagine you're a parent.
Ooh.
And you think, there's a cool game called Colonel Custer's Revenge.
I remember him.
I remember him. Maybe this is a cool historical game. So there's no review.
I like history.
There's no review websites. There's no way to research the game you're purchasing. So you bring this home and you bring it to your kid.
Little Johnny
puts it in, and you just hear him giggling and laughing in the background. So you poke your head in, and what do you find? Little Johnny's watching completely pornographic content on his 8-pixel Atari.
To be more accurate, you probably walk in and at first you think, what is that? And you look at it for a little bit.
And you have to squint.
Yeah. After a while, you realize what it is. And
so this anecdote is essentially, well, it's not just an anecdote. This is a true thing that would have happened to families. There was a niche market for pornographic games on the Atari 2600.
Pornographic.
Right. Of as many as pornographic as you can get with 10 pixels.
Yeah.
But I mean, we joke about it, but that's scary. Can you imagine the fear? If I was a parent, I'd never buy my kid another video game again because I don't know what's coming out of that box.
Yeah, and some of these games may have been sold behind the counter or stuff, but once it's over the counter, it's just out in the wild and nobody knows what it is.
Yep.
So
Exactly. So yeah, that was another just huge consumer confidence crush was this, these X-rated games that today you can't. They exist, but they don't sell. You're not going to get them on a home console because there's quality control, and we'll get into that during the recovery.
Yeah, there are major retailers that will not have any pornographic video games in there, so that limits a lot of these types of games are not on current consoles really.
Yep.
And we can talk about it, but it's just between having crappy games and just adult games that are not at all controlled or licensed. Consumer confidence, especially parent consumer confidence, probably not doing so good after that, and they're not going to be buying old Atari anymore.
100%. But obviously, we know there is a major video game industry market. So briefly before we wrap up here, we'll talk about some of the recovery, Nintendo's hand in helping bring the video game industry back, and how we got where we are. All right, so we've seen major success in the video game industry. We've seen how consumer confidence just destroyed it. Oversaturation of poor quality games. But did the video game industry come back? I mean,
no.
Well,
credits.
It's all imaginary.
Roll credits.
No, but obviously we did see a major resurgence in video games, and so we kind of want to talk about why, kind of what happened.
The death and the rebirth.
So yeah, basically, Atari destroyed it, Nintendo saved the day.
To put it simply.
Way oversimplify it, yes. But Nintendo did have a very large part in the recovery. So the NES released, in my notes here, the Nintendo Entertainment System released in North America in 1985, 83 in Japan.
Yep.
But one thing that I found that was really interesting is that when Nintendo decided to break into the US, they avoided the term video game like the plague. They in their marketing, they really marketed the NES as a toy. So when they sold it with a Rob the Robot and a light gun zapper, and it's really a toy that you were getting out and playing with. And so that was really a genius on their end, is really coming back in a dry market. They had really waited, about 2-3 years, and when they brought it back smart.
Yeah. I mean, if we wanted to go into the difference of quality control with this,
yes.
So this, as far as I know, you did not have to have a license from Atari to make games for this. Anybody can make them. You can make them out of your garage. It doesn't matter. With the NES, Nintendo realized that this was presumably they realized it because they made a fix for it. But they knew that having just unauthorized people make stuff for your console is bad. You want to have some control over the quality of that, so you can pick and choose which games are or not going to come out on your console. So the NES has, and Seth's going to show it here, the Nintendo Seal of Quality. So that basically says this game has been approved by Nintendo for publish. So there are instances of games that did not have a Nintendo seal of quality, and they were able to kind of bypass this. But the Nintendo inside has a chip on the motherboard. It's called the NES lockout chip or something like that. But that chip is kind of the security feature of the NES, that it has to work with a chip or an integrated circuit in here, and it talks to the chip inside your Nintendo to allow it to play. And if something is wrong with that, if the cartridge is dirty, if it's a bootleg, it either will not work at all or work very poorly. And obviously there were people that were able to bypass this, but generally it's like a Nintendo seal quality game is at least going to work, right? It's going to work. It's going to be at least some level of quality.
Exactly. And they did it right because they came back and they made excellent products. So they had an excellent, this beast of a VCR right here was an excellent quality product. The light gun zapper worked wonderfully. Basically everything that Nintendo released built customer confidence. Consumers knew that Nintendo was a quality product. And so when software was released that had their seal of approval, you got more of a warm feeling when it came to like Nintendo. I mean, this is the reason why your grandma still calls any video game you bring into the house a Nintendo. It doesn't matter. It's a Nintendo because they focused on making themselves a household name and making their own software. So when they built, Nintendo didn't just come out with a console to play video games. They made Mario. They made Zelda. They made excellent games that you knew were going to be a quality product. And so because those were a quality product, anything they put their seal of approval on was going to be a quality product.
And I was even thinking last night, it's just like, even today, Nintendo quality is like Apple quality or something. It's like Nintendo just has this air about it of just at least the games. Sometimes their systems are hit and miss. Generally pretty good. But it's like if you get a first party Nintendo game, you can count on it being at least decent. Like Nintendo has kept their level of quality since this. They realize it's like they need to have something special, and that's what they have. And
I think that's really what sets Nintendo apart in the in the console wars. It's why they're kind of held apart from the petty squabblings of PlayStation and Xbox.
But there's Nintendo magic. There's something there. There's something different. But I mean, I would say the era pre-Crash was defined by the Atari 2600, and after Nintendo. This is when it's kind of funny because maybe this is tangential, but it kind of happened with a few industries where the American side of the industry really tanked and took a crap, and then the Japanese industry comes along and does it right. It's like the video game Crash. The same thing happened with Harley Davidson and Japanese motorcycles, with cars, with television, all this stuff. But I don't know. It's an interesting little kind of. It's a very important part of the industry, and if it had not happened, the industry would not be the same today.
No, I think video games may have resurged in some form or another.
Could have been pure PC.
But Nintendo really shaped what the industry is today. Absolutely. So do you see any parallels between the video game industry crash and kind of the climate that we see in the video game industry today?
I would say the overall climate is different, right? So back then it was a huge deal, but video games had not been cemented as like a permanent form of
a cultural zeitgeist.
Like a permanent form of cultural entertainment, kind of. So, back then it could have just been done and died then. But now I think with his. Like, I was looking at the statistics. So another thing that Nintendo did is they did all kinds of like focus testing, and they looked at the statistics of who was actually playing their games. And back then they found that it was mostly boys, which makes sense. I knew a ton of women back then. My sister, my babysitters, all these people, all these women that played video games. But according to Nintendo's questionnaires or whatever they had, so they marketed the Game Boy, stuff like that. But now. It said on the whatever maybe you can reference it here. One of the articles says that it's like today 50% of gamers are women. It was like 50% of PC gamers or console gamers were women, and then the other was like 49% women. So it's just like the field is a lot more diverse out there. There's a lot more different kinds of games you can play out there, and with marketplaces like Steam where you can play some really niche kind of indie stuff. we're in a time period now where your hobbyist can make an amazing game with the type of software and support that we have and the tools.
And to cite it, a lot of this portion is coming from the video game crash of '83 helped turn games into a boys club by Agni Nitty.
Yeah. So I think what they're saying there is kind of before everybody played Atari, everybody played Atari. I think the way I kind of think of it is like back then it was like literally a video board game. Where you're playing a game on your television, right? So it's like everybody plays board games, but when you came into the NES era, when it is marketed more towards boys and men, I guess probably more boys.
Yeah.
You can tell, with everything about it, it's more focused towards boys kind of interests. So, and obviously, things are totally different then, but it's like that's a part of what helped them, market research.
There are parallels. I think we do see customer confidence is deteriorating in the current climate of video games because it's such a huge cultural thing. We're kind of getting back, especially on things like Steam and a lot of PC storefronts. You're kind of getting back to that Atari era of anyone with coding knowledge can throw a game out there. And you get a lot of shovelware because of it. On top of that, not just with Steam, you've got storefronts like, and again, we love Nintendo, but you were mentioning this about their storefront. It's a chore to browse through.
It's just interesting that Nintendo is just kind of so careful with their own property and their consoles and stuff. And then the Nintendo storefront is just awash with shovelware. It's crap. And what's funny is you'll see a lot of like borderline porn games on their marketplace now, where that was specifically something that they did not deal with. It's just like Nintendo is, and it's probably they make money either way, so they don't care. But it's just like as a consumer, it's like there's all this garbage on this storefront, and maybe there's filters for parents and stuff. It's like if I'm a parent, I wouldn't want my kids browsing.
There's definitely some thumbnails for games I would see that I'd be like, nope.
Like, no, it's probably not appropriate. But but still, Nintendo is still associated with quality. I don't know what's going on with their online storefronts, but honestly, a lot of online storefronts are pretty bad. I don't know what the deal is.
That's not a Nintendo exclusive thing. So essentially, there are parallels with oversaturation and customer confidence, but I think at this point, video games are such a zeitgeist. We'll see the industry change, maybe. I think we'll see a lot of like independent developers being better funded and becoming
absolutely some of the coolest games to come out in the past 20 years were like single people development teams.
So we're not going to see an industry-wide crash, but we are going to see a huge boom and we already are seeing a huge boom in independent developers, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, it'll change and morph. Like the crash could have been the end. It wasn't. So now I think all we'll get is hiccups. It's established itself. I think, and maybe you can add these statistics in. I think the video game industry is the largest entertainment industry. That's true. Period.
Yep. Which let me get that. Let me get that number as a final source here.
It's like even between the movie industry, Hollywood, the music industry. I think video game industry as a whole is the number one entertainment industry in the world. And, back in 1982, that was not the case. In 1983, it was not the case.
Yep. This is from Statista. This is as of 2021. The video game industry is $192.7 billion. The second, not the film industry.
Music?
Ebooks. Books, printed and ebooks.
Okay.
120.1 billion, and filmed entertainment 99.7 billion. So more than double the film industry.
Yeah,
it's huge.
You just can't ignore it anymore, and the people making the money aren't going to ignore it either. If there's money to be made there, they're going to make it.
Yeah.
And one thing I kind of thought about too is the Atari we talked about. They printed too many cartridges because they thought they knew what the consumers wanted.
Yeah.
Nintendo did studies, they did questionnaires and stuff, and they found out what the consumer wanted. They went to
the source, grassroots campaign.
Well, that's the thing is, it's just like they were just trying to they just imagined what the consumer wanted, and Nintendo took the time and made a quality product using what they had found out.
Excellent. Yeah. Go Nintendo.
Yeah.
So, just closing thoughts here.
it's hard to imagine what would happen to the industry back then if it was not for the crash, because you know, maybe the Japanese side of the market wouldn't have infiltrated America like it did. Maybe Atari would still be a powerhouse.
I think if it hadn't have crashed, I imagine it looking a little bit more like the comic book industry. Just tons of different developers that made their own hardware and software, and just many more disparate companies just releasing a lot of shovelware. Because I mean, I'm not a comic fan, but obviously there are tons of different like variations on the same comics over and over again. And I imagine if it hadn't been a hard crash, I think the video game industry would probably look a little bit more like that.
And I think especially back then, you know, we talk about the Atari 2600 a lot, but there were a lot of just random consoles out there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, before this, where you had the cartridge style, where you could change games and stuff, they had the, you know, Pong consoles.
Yep.
And there was like 100 different types of Pong
different
consoles.
variations of that.
Yeah, it's just like when there's just so many choices and you don't really have any good way of figuring out as a consumer which ones are actually good or which ones are bad. That is not good for long-term confidence, I don't think. Let's
talk about one other thing as far as the recovery. That's another thing, is Nintendo publishing its own magazine. Because we had Nintendo Power, because that was another thing, is you didn't really have any good way to like know if the game that you were getting was good. So Nintendo Power comes out and you have a mainstream mass-produced magazine. It's obviously marketed towards Nintendo, so
it's kind of conflict of interest, but yeah,
very biased. But it's something. It was something that would allow you to read ahead of time, be able to do your research, and so it's another thing that went towards fixing customer confidence.
Yeah, I think Nintendo Power really took off in the very early 90s, because like issue 1 is Super Mario Bros. 2, so that would have been probably late 80s, I think. But yeah, that, I mean, you really started seeing, you know, video game and computer magazines late in the 80s, and then, you know, in the 90s you start having TV shows that review and talk about that. So yeah,
very good. Well, I think that's all the thoughts that I have as far as the video game crash, and it's been great talking about this, doing a deep dive. I appreciate the research that you put
always
in. And thank you very much for joining us. If you have any questions, future topics that you want to see, go ahead and comment below. Other than that, this is a placeholder outro.
Sayonara.